Story 1. Back in high school, I was part of a wealthy school district in Connecticut, where every year we had the chance to go on cool field trips. One year, as a sophomore, our class went on a trip to Woodloch Pines Resort in Pennsylvania. The bus ride took hours, and I was with my best friend, Landon. We knew it was going to be pretty quiet since it was November, and the resort was mostly empty. We had 3 days planned, with only a few chaperones. They weren't really watching us closely. We just had to check in and tell them what we were doing. On the first day, Landon and I had a blast. Go-karting, rock climbing, swimming, and a nice dinner. We were exhausted by the end of it, so we headed back to our room. The room was on the ground level with a big sliding glass door that overlooked a lake down the hill. The view at night was stunning, with the moon reflecting off the water. It seemed perfect. But what happened next was anything but perfect. We were lying in bed, trying to get comfortable. It must have been an hour of tossing and turning when suddenly Landon screamed. At first I thought it was some joke, but then I looked over at the door and my heart dropped. Standing on the other side of the glass was an old woman. She was tall and unnaturally thin, with long graying hair. Her face was pressed up against the door, as though she was trying to see into the room. She stood there, motionless for a few seconds, before turning and walking away. Landon looked at me, terrified. I knew he was waiting for me to do something, so I reluctantly got up. We ran outside after her, hoping to confront her, but the place was dead silent. The cement path that ran past the rooms was empty. No one in the grass, no one walking down the hill. It was like she had vanished. That night, we didn't tell the chaperones. We didn't want to seem crazy, but we told the 2 girls we were friends with. When night fell again, we were both on edge. We went back to the room, made sure the blinds were shut tight, and tried to get some rest. Landon fell asleep quickly, but I couldn't. I woke up to a strange, suffocating silence. Something felt wrong. I sat up in bed, whispering Landon's name, but he didn't answer. Curiosity and instinct took over, and I turned to look at him. But I couldn't see him. The space next to me was empty. I looked up, and there she was, the old woman. She was towering over my bed, her eyes fixed on me, her shadow stretching across the room. She took 2 steps back and spoke, her voice cold, emotionless. "Your back door was unlocked." Then she turned and walked out, disappearing into the night. I couldn't move. My whole body was frozen. I shook Landon awake, telling him what had happened. We locked the door, pulled the blinds shut again, and stayed awake the rest of the night. It was already 4 a.m. by then, so we decided to power through until morning. By 8 a.m., we went to breakfast. But when we got back to our room building, something even stranger awaited. Through the glass of the neighboring room, we saw her again, sitting on the bed, staring straight ahead, hands folded, unmoving. And there was an older man sitting on the other bed, just as still, his eyes blank. We ran straight to the front desk to report what we'd seen. The staff seemed confused, like they didn't know what to do. Eventually, we convinced them to check out the room, and when they did, they found the old woman sitting there just like we said. But it wasn't just her. There was the man, too. Apparently, the woman had some mental issues, and the man wasn't much better. But they weren't the kind of guests you expect to see at a family-friendly resort. Unfortunately, the staff wouldn't kick them out, even though we begged. After a lot of arguing, the chaperones finally decided we needed to leave early. Landon and I were just relieved to be getting out of there. The whole trip had turned into a nightmare we'd never forget. Story 2. When I was in the 4th grade, my class went on a field trip to a small rural zoo about an hour away from school. It was one of those cloudy days where the occasional raindrop would fall, making the air feel heavy. The zoo itself wasn't much. Mostly small, kid-friendly animals, nothing exotic. But there was a large building with taxidermied animals on display and some other odd exhibits that I can't quite remember. Now, I wasn't exactly the most social kid in elementary school. I often did strange things, like drifting away from the group, something that my teachers and my mom had noticed. But this day, I did something I can never forget. While everyone was touring the building, I slipped away without telling anyone. I found a bathroom, did my business, and washed my hands, then walked back into the hallway. It was eerily quiet. The lights were dim, and the carpet was a deep scarlet red. My imagination ran wild as I passed by all the lifeless stuffed animals behind glass cases. Then, out of nowhere, I froze. A man was hiding behind a stack of chairs, clearly trying to avoid being seen. I thought he was just messing around, maybe playing a prank. He stepped out from behind the chairs and came straight toward me. "Where's the group?" he asked, his voice low and strange. "I don't know," I replied, confused. Before I could process what was happening, he grabbed my hand and told me to follow him. I thought he was taking me back to the others, but instead, he led me to a door at the back of the building. It opened into a small, dreary area by a couple of dumpsters, some benches, and the woods. As we stepped outside, his grip tightened around my arm, pulling me farther away from the building. At that moment, something inside me flipped. I wasn't just confused anymore. I was terrified. My stomach churned with fear, and I felt like I was going to throw up. But I didn't scream. I didn't cry for help. I just froze, too scared to do anything. And then, just when I thought it couldn't get worse, I heard a woman scream. It was one of the teachers, her voice piercing the air. The man immediately let go of my arm and bolted into the woods. Within seconds, a few teachers came rushing outside, shouting and grabbing me, pulling me back into the safety of the building. They were furious, but they were also shaking with relief. They called my parents, and just like that, the field trip was over. The owners of the zoo called the cops, and we all got on the buses heading home. But as my bus pulled out of the parking lot, I caught something that made my blood run cold. There he was, the same man, crouching behind a branch in the woods, his eyes fixed on the road, watching the buses as they passed by. My heart stopped. He was waiting for the right moment. I didn't tell anyone. Maybe I was too scared, or maybe I was just too shy to speak up. But all I could think about was how close I had come to something terrible. The other kids on the bus looked at me like I was weird, but I didn't care. I just wanted to get home, and I prayed that man never found success in taking an unsuspecting child like me again. Story 3. Back in high school, I took this class on real-life mysteries and creepy stuff. Honestly, I can't even remember the exact name, but it was all about the weirdest, unexplained events in history. I was super into that kind of thing, and I was taking the class with my good friend Ben. Our teacher decided to take us on a field trip to a nearby abandoned village with a mysterious past. This village was built in the early 1900s, but for some unknown reason, it was abandoned almost immediately after it was constructed. The bus ride there was only about 20 minutes, but we were all glued to the windows as we drove down this eerie, decrepit road cutting through dense forest. The road eventually opened up into a clearing, and there it was, the village. The first thing that hit me was the feeling of something being wrong. The road was cracked with grass growing through it, and the grass around the buildings was almost knee-high. The buildings themselves were tall, ancient brick structures, their windows boarded up, making them look like they were frozen in time. It was the kind of place that gave you chills. The teacher lined us all up, there were about 20 of us, and started counting heads. The goal of this field trip was to see if we could figure out why the village had been abandoned. We were supposed to use all the skills we'd learned in class to make sense of it. Some of the buildings had holes in the walls, some were dug out as entryways, and there were even holes in the ground near a few buildings, likely leading to basements. It was creepy as hell, but there was one building that stood out from the rest. It was taller than the others, almost towering. While the teacher was leading the group toward the village's old church, Ben and I decided to sneak off and check it out. As we walked toward the big building, we noticed a hole in the ground behind it, near a sealed-off back door. We both exchanged a look. We had to see what was down there. Ben climbed down first, then me. Fortunately, this was back when Apple added flashlights to their phones, so we had some light. It was dark and musty underground, with a few beer bottles scattered around and one lonely graffiti tag on the wall. The floor was covered with dusty wooden planks, and there was a rickety wooden staircase leading up into complete darkness. Despite how sketchy it was, we decided to go up. Each step was louder than the last, creaking under our weight, like the whole thing was ready to collapse. Ben followed me up, and when we reached the top, it was pitch black. The air was thick with dust. We could barely make out anything, and the place felt tighter, with small rooms leading off from the hallway. It was so dark, you would have never guessed it was daytime outside. We were both starting to get freaked out and agreed to head back. But just as we turned to leave, we heard something, like a big rock hitting the concrete floor in one of the tiny rooms. Normally we'd run, but instead, we froze. We locked eyes for a second, both of us too scared to move, then slowly tiptoed to the opening of the room. When we shone our phone lights inside, we saw them. 3 guys, standing in the room, facing us, maybe 10 feet away from the doorway. And they weren't moving. They were just standing there, completely still, as if they were waiting for us. I've never run so fast in my life. We bolted back down the stairs, through the dust, and up the rusty ladder to the outside. Our hearts were racing. We didn't say anything to the group at first. When one of our classmates asked what was wrong, we told him we'd snuck into the building and saw a few people inside. We said we'd seen 3 guys standing in a room just staring at us. The rest of the day, we kept an eye on that building. From a distance, before we left, we saw something that froze me in place. Someone's face in one of the upper windows that hadn't been boarded up. The face just stared down at us. We didn't say anything to the teacher. We didn't want to get in trouble. But the whole trip, I couldn't stop thinking about what we saw. Were they just homeless people living there? Or were they part of some gang hiding out? Ben has his own theory. He's convinced those 3 guys were ghosts, the spirits of the people who used to live in the village. The way they stood there, completely still, as if they were waiting for us. I don't know. Maybe he's right. It still haunts me to this day. Sometimes, I wonder if I'll ever go back to that village, just to prove Ben's theory wrong. But even the thought of it makes my stomach turn.
Please, don't forget to like and subscribe. And remember, the darkness is always surrounding us, just waiting for a chance. Thanks for watched. See you next story.